Shortly after midnight on May 7th, Indian air assets struck targets inside Pakistan and Western Kashmir. Pakistani fighter jets responded and planes were downed, including Rafales. A week later, it's been confirmed that at least 2 Indian combat jets were downed by Pakistani fire. This video compiles available information to explain how the battle likely unfolded. Some are calling it the largest air battle in recent history. We will present a plausible sequence of events, analyzing how and why India lost its prized Rafale aircraft to Chinese-made J-10 jets, and why this marks a pivotal moment in air combat history. So this much is known. Between 12:35 and 1 a.m. Pakistani time, munitions hit 14 target sets across 9 locations in Pakistan and Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. Most strikes were conducted by Indian Air Force aircraft, launching near the border. Despite having ground-launched cruise missiles and longer-range options, India mostly used shorter-range weapons, like French-made hammer bombs and Israeli spice bombs, according to Indian sources. India did employ some Scalp-EG cruise missiles from Rafales and a few air-launched Brahmos from Sukhois, but the bulk of the firepower came from cheaper guided bombs. India possibly viewed the operation as a limited punitive strike, not something that would cause Pakistan to respond, and thus chose not to deplete more costly weapons. Post-event reports, including a Pakistani military briefing, suggest the entire air operation spanned over an hour. However, this refers to the full engagement window from the moment Pakistan tracked the strike force assembly to the eventual aerial disengagement, not an hour of continuous missile fire. Before any bombs are launched, the strike package must be assembled. This includes bomb or missile-carrying aircraft, fighter escorts, possibly aircraft for suppressing enemy air defenses, and likely AWACS-type planes. These assets don't all come from the same base, so different types must be launched in coordination and grouped into large formations. Planes must stay somewhat spaced out, but close enough to protect each other. This coordination spanned a wide geographic area to cover all targets. According to the Pakistani military, initial Indian formations included 60 detected aircraft, increasing to 72 during the operation. CNN, citing Pakistani sources, reported up to 125 aircraft in the air at one point. The Pakistani briefing mentioned 72 Indian and 42 Pakistani planes, totaling 114. Depending on detection criteria and inclusion of support aircraft, the number might indeed have reached around 120. Indian formations appeared widely spread out. The distance between the northernmost and southernmost ground targets was 600 kilometers, but Indian air formations' total spread along the border might have reached 900 kilometers. The Pakistani briefing indicated 4 distinct Indian groupings attacking on 4 separate axes, with about 200 to 300 kilometers between each. That distance could still be too great for timely mutual support of separate formations during fast-paced missile engagements. Each formation had its own strike group, escort group, and likely suppression of enemy air defense elements, tailored to its specific target set. Redirecting planes mid-mission would jeopardize those objectives and reduce protection for the rest of the group. Assembling all these aircraft into coordinated strike groups took time. If weapons began striking at 35 minutes past midnight, first Indian takeoffs likely happened half an hour earlier. The Pakistani brief timeline said Indian aircraft buildup was observed at 10 minutes past midnight, which fits. Another key point is that the Indian operation wasn't a surprise. As early as April 29th, Pakistan's defense minister warned that Indian military action was imminent, repeating the claim on May 5th. Unconfirmed reports indicated that India had begun organizing aircraft days before the strikes, concentrating around 180 combat planes near the border. It appears India made little effort to conceal its intent to respond militarily to the April 22nd terrorist attack in Kashmir. It appears India even informed Pakistan it would strike what it considered terrorist camps. Such forewarning isn't unprecedented, as it can reduce risks between countries. India's large air formations may have been both a show of force and a political message. Perhaps it hoped that by telegraphing its intent, and avoiding border crossings, Pakistan would avoid retaliation. Of course, all this remains speculation. What's certain is that Pakistan knew an attack was coming. It maintained continuous air patrols, including AWACS, and kept its most advanced fighters on high alert, ready to launch within minutes. The Indian operation seemed designed as a one-time punitive strike, not a part of a broader military effort. If a wider conflict had been anticipated, India would have repositioned more units, reinforced its front, and used air bases deeper inside its territory. Instead, India appeared not to expect serious resistance. Aircraft launched from peacetime bases located quite close to the border and assembled their strike formations in air immediately before the operation. India's 2 Rafale units and many other participating squadrons are based close to the border, typically 100 to 200 kilometers away or less. Now observe western India's flat terrain, from the Thar Desert in Rajasthan to Punjab's fields. It's ideal for long-range surveillance due to minimal ground clutter. As soon as Indian planes took off and gained some altitude, it's likely Pakistani AWACS tracked them. Pakistan operates 9 Swedish areas. Saab's promo materials from the 2000s suggested its radars can detect low-flying cruise missiles from 180 kilometers away, and fighter jets have an order of magnitude bigger radar returns. This makes it plausible Pakistani AWACS could detect Indian jets from 300 plus kilometers. As Indian sorties increased, Pakistani AWACS likely moved to safer airspace deeper inside Pakistan. According to the Pakistani military, their interception force began taking off at 12:23. By 12:30, 4 Indian strike packages were assembled and ready. Given their proximity to the border, strikes began within minutes. Pakistan claimed to identify 14 Rafales in the Indian force, 39% of India's Rafale fleet, though that number isn't confirmed. We can't know how many Indian planes were tasked to do air combat, but based on the number of ground targets and weapon impacts, about 24, it's reasonable that at least a dozen Indian planes were assigned precision ground strikes. Images exist of Scalp EG and air-launched Brahmos missile parts in the fields. Brahmos is huge, with just one carried per Su-30. Scalp missile remains suggest at least some didn't reach targets. Basically, all those required a few additional air-to-ground configured planes. Whether India attempted suppression of enemy air defenses is unclear, but that role likely required extra aircraft, perhaps 2 per package. It's thus plausible that 24 Indian planes weren't configured for air-to-air roles, suggesting 36 to 48 being assigned to fighter escort. With 4 separate groups, that equates to just 12 fighters per group. Pakistan, according to its brief, had 42 advanced aircraft airborne, likely mostly fighters. They claim no F-16s were used, possibly to avoid political fallout with the US. Still, Pakistan fields 20 to 30 J-10CEs, 40 JF-17 Block 3s, and about 130 older JF-17 variants. Of course, entire fleets can't be ready for action, so the composition shown in the table may be plausible. What likely happened is this. Pakistan, though outnumbered, had 15 minutes to reposition its airborne forces. Initially tasked with deterring India, their mission shifted to interception once Indian strikes began. According to the Pakistani military, the goal became to assure enemy kills while denying own losses, suggesting a cautious approach that prioritized crew and aircraft safety, even if that meant fewer Indian planes downed. Pakistan appears to have concentrated its jets near the northern tip of the Indian formations, allocating around 3/4 of its force against half of India's, creating local numerical superiority. Indian jets focused on pre-planned ground attacks were less flexible. India reportedly scrambled an additional dozen fighters, but who knows if those arrived too late to matter. Pakistan famously claimed it downed 5 Indian jets. Their briefing map shows missile hits occurring 13 to 98 kilometers inside Indian territory, though not all claimed hits may have been real. Both countries agreed that no aircraft crossed the border, only missiles and bombs did. Pakistan claims 3 Rafales and 2 Russian-made jets were shot down. Following the battle, local Indian authorities reported 3 separate aircraft crashes, initially attributed to accidents. While one crash might be plausible in such a high-tempo operation, 3 seem less coincidental. French and US sources added weight to Pakistani claims. A French intelligence officer told CNN one Rafale was confirmed lost, with more under review. US officials told Reuters that at least 2 Indian aircraft were downed, so 2 to 3 losses for India seem credible as a low estimate. Various videos and images of crash sites emerged, mostly in the north, with one possible Rafale wreckage further south, though unverified. But most can't be tied to a precise plane type. When Pakistani missile hit claims are mapped against crash site reports, some alignment is visible. Some wrecks lie closer to the Pakistani border than their claimed hit locations, suggesting hits occurred during Indian advances, while others lie further away, likely occurring during aircraft going back to base. This fits known mission profiles. Rafales were used to launch Scalp missiles and Hammer bombs, so some likely turned back after releasing payloads. Escorted ground strike aircraft would logically retreat quickly, with forward escorts lingering around possibly a bit longer. In terms of distances, most claimed hits fall within feasible engagement ranges. The northern MiG-29 and Su-30 claimed losses appear plausible, especially if the Su-30 was advancing. A Rafale allegedly hit 100 kilometers past the borders seems dubious though, and no wreckage visuals support it. However, another Rafale reportedly downed while advancing to the south seems credible. The southernmost Rafale hit is marginally feasible, but all those apply only if Pakistani jets fired missiles very close to the border, which likely wasn't the case. That would have been too risky. A plane moving away from a fired missile, especially at speeds like Mach 1.8, is much harder to hit. Air-to-air missiles rapidly accelerate after launch, but burn through their fuel in seconds. The PL-15 missile used by Pakistani J-10s may have a double-pulse rocket motor. It initially accelerates, coasts to apogee, then reignites for a second pulse before gliding and decelerating. In contrast, the older AMRAAM C-5, sort of comparable to most Indian missiles, has a single pulse motor. It slows to Mach 2 around 40 kilometers from launch, under a minute into flight. The C-5 is some 15 years older than the PL-15 and visibly smaller. Also, with advances in electronics miniaturization freeing up space for fuel, the PL-15 may carry up to 70% more propellant than the C-5. Many other factors influence performance: drag, flight path, and the mentioned twin-pulse propulsion. The export version PL-15 is advertised with a 145-kilometer range. Typically, that would be against an oncoming subsonic target. Exact interception speeds aren't known, but assuming the missile is still traveling at Mach 1 at that distance suggests it might retain Mach 1.25 at about 110 kilometers into flight at interception point. That could be just enough to hit a poorly alert advancing target. The key question is whether Indian planes were unaware of the incoming threat. There is no definitive information, only rumors. One claim is that Indian Rafales lack the ability to share data-linked battlefield maps with other Indian aircraft, including AWACS. Limited comms could have hindered their situational awareness. While Rafales have self-defense suites that alert them to threats, there are scenarios where that might not happen. Indian pilots may not have expected to be targeted. India publicly framed the mission as a strike on terrorist camps, not on Pakistani military, and possibly communicated that to Pakistan. Indian aircraft didn't cross the border. They had numerical superiority, and the average Indian plane is still more advanced than the average Pakistani one. They may have also underestimated Chinese-made radars and PL-15 missiles. Pakistan likely used its AWACS to provide targeting data. J-10 fighters may have kept their radars off or in less threatening modes. If Indian pilots were briefed to expect minimal resistance, they may not have perceived the threat. Pakistani area AWACS could have told the J-10s where to be and at which moment to fire the missiles. Then the airborne PL-15 missiles could have received mid-course updates, possibly even from AWACS directly. Even if J-10s provided course correction signals to missiles, Indians might have not been alerted. Rafale pilots might only have received alerts in the final 30 kilometers of missile flight, when the missile's radar activates. It's even possible, though unlikely, that Rafale self-defense systems fail to classify the PL-15 radar as hostile, especially since it's a new missile. PL-15's AESA seeker may also have made detection harder. This was its first combat use, and its radar signature may not have been known outside China and Pakistan. If all of this happened, Indian pilots may have had minimal warning. Pakistan's briefing claims they intercepted the Rafale unit leader's radio message wondering why a wingman wasn't responding, possibly unaware an attack had occurred. All this conjecture may also explain why Meteor missiles aren't mentioned anywhere. The Rafale pilots that were on escort missions turned towards the enemy might simply not have had enough warning. For those planes that were hit, assuming some warning, last-ditch evasive maneuvers could still be tried. Some PL-15s clearly missed. Multiple missile wreckages were found in India, but some hit. Rafales are India's most advanced fighters. Older jets like MiG-29s and Su-30s may have struggled even more to detect incoming missiles in time. All this was one plausible explanation for how India lost the air battle: a flawed political approach and planning for a limited punitive strike, rather than a real fight against a responsive enemy. Had India anticipated serious resistance, it might have launched larger, more layered strike packages, possibly targeting air defenses and bases first. Instead, it attacked those only after the battle, as actually happened. Of course, India didn't want to start the war. A mix of unpreparedness, poor planning, underestimating Pakistan, and Pakistan's advanced new technologies also helps explain India's aircraft losses. Rafale wasn't lost because it's a poor plane. It's a good plane. Most modern non-stealthy planes might have met the same fate in the given situation. More importantly, this battle demonstrated in reality what has been theorized for decades: that enemy formations can be positively identified, tracked, and engaged from long range. In modern air combat, it's radars, data links, formation coordination, missile capabilities, and defensive systems that determine the outcome. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.